Yo, what's good? What's happening? Welcome to Stories Over Sound. It's your man GodSouL. Gonna give it a few minutes, get the mood set right. If y'all can hear, I got the instrumental or the sample version of the sample that Swiss Beats used for Dr. Carter for Lil Wayne's off the Carter 3. So I feel like that's kind of what sets the vibe. It's because it perfectly describes like what I do here. Like if you remember, if you heard the song before, uh, the nurse is essentially bringing in rappers to Dr. Carter, Lil Wayne, and she's giving him the diagnosis of like what's going on, the symptoms and stuff like that. And in his verses, he's breaking down like what their issue is and how they need to solve it or resolve it, essentially depending on how strong or how weak the case is. Like two of the patients actually they died on the table because they didn't have what it took, and then the last one because he had potential, and he followed Dr. Carter's instructions and the prescription. He essentially survived. I like the end. He was like, "Welcome back, hip hop. I saved your life." I thought that was so dope. But yeah, for those that don't know, I go by the name God Soul. Stories Over Sound is where we at right now. And what we do here is we put the intentions and the message back in the music. And the way we do that is we focus on what's unclear, and then I find what contradicts, and then I'm gonna tell you the truth. I'm not here to polish records. What I do is I put pressure on decisions. Because essentially a lot of times what happens is it's not that the art isn't there. It's not that what you're doing isn't dope. It's just that you haven't decided or made clear what your decision, what your direction is. You need somebody to help you do that. And that's what I'm here for. But I can also tell you what I'm not here for. I'm not here to teach you how to make beats, but I am here to show why artists stay stuck even when the music sounds good. So today, because it's the first one, the way it's gonna kind of go is I'm gonna go over like two scenarios, two situations that I had this past week involving working with some artists and stuff like that. Give y'all the rundown, set the scene for you, and then highlight certain key things and certain elements that I brought into the room that helped the person get from where they were at up to the next level to continue on either with the process or lead towards completion. Give it a few more seconds, and we're gonna get right into this evening. You know what I'm saying? I ain't gonna hold y'all too long. Matter of fact, yo, while we waiting, in the chat, yo, put down where you at, what's your tag name, what's your IG, your social handles, and stuff like that. What you do, what's your forte, what's your specialty, and then let everybody know if there's any projects, anything up and coming you're either already working on, planning to like release, was slated, for later on this year, this month, or something like that. Or even put down what your intentions, your desires are seeing, for your art, for your creative work, for the upcoming couple of months. Give it about till 9:05. Then gonna kick this thing off. That sample is so cold. All right, so here we go. Like I said, my name is God Soul. What I do is I find what's unclear in people's music in that direction. I find what contradicts in their message and the story that their music is telling. I tell them the truth then, and I don't polish the records. I help put pressure on decisions. Not even I help, I actually put pressure on decisions, asking those tough questions, filling those gaps that need to be filled in order to help push people in the right direction to get them where they need to go in order to get to the point of completion with their work. Again, what we're here to work on is finding out why artists stay stuck even when the music sounds good. I'm not here to coach you on how to make beats, how to mix, or anything like that, even song lyrics or anything like that, unless we talking about storytelling. So, like I said, tonight we're going to focus on two particular scenarios that I actually encountered the last week with two different artists, two different sessions. I'm going to give you the rundown of how it went, what I interjected, and what the outcome ultimately was. And then, even as we continue to go along, because I always like to take notes after each session so I can not only help them, but then help myself as well. But then I think it would be a good point to even bring it back, as the story updates to keep you all updated with it as well, so that not only am I growing and the artist is growing as well, but you all are growing along with it, not only following the story, but then, following with the lessons that are learned so that we can all apply that, to our own strategies and be intentional about that. So we're, executing at the highest level. So, okay, got you. All righty. So the first case that I'm going to go over, I'm leaving names and everything off of this, for the sake of uh, protecting the individuals and protecting the relationships, because I believe definitely having relationships is probably one of the strongest points. Number one is what gets you in the room. It's going to keep you in the room, and it's going to keep that integrity going with the relationships with you and the artist that you're working with. So I'll call this case creative fear of completion. And what that looks like, or what that means, is somebody who's so super creative that they have 50 million ideas, and instead of just capitalizing off of one and continue to build and figure out what works and what doesn't, they continue just to create and don't actually pick a direction or pick something that actually is going to stick or going to land. And they just keep going and going and going and essentially just going a perpetual loop. And so in this case, it's kind of what the artist was doing. So to set the scene for you, this particular artist, they have a very unique brand and style with music that they do. A live instrumentalist, super talented, super creative, uh, multiple instrumentalists. So when you talk about creativity and range, they can create for days, and that's kind of what they were working with and what was keeping them stuck. The vibe going into it is very like housey, but they love live instruments, and that's the kind of feel even on recording that they wanted to bring to this particular project. And so that's what we're working on. And so when I come into the space, almost all the times it always feels like it's going to be a jam session. Uh, Very jazzy, not necessarily in the genre of the music, but just the creative process and the way they go about it. And so normally they'll come in and they'll just kind of play some stuff for me and say, hey, this is what I've been working on. This is what I've been creating, what I've been feeling, chords, progressions, different sounds and elements and stuff like that. But very rarely do we actually get down to the nitty gritty of what's some lyrics we can lay down or create or get it to the point of completion. And so in this particular case, that's what I always look to contribute whenever we connect and we collaborate. So I do that usually by asking a series of questions. And almost always, if anybody knows me or ever worked, one of the first things I'm always going to ask is, what's the story or what's the status of what's going on? The reason being is I'm trying to find where they are, whether that be emotionally, spiritually, or even creatively. Because if we're working on a particular thing and that's not where they are at the moment or no longer, then there's no point of trying to force them to work on that, because what I'm going to get out either is not going to be in alignment or it's not going to be the best that matches where they are. And I always want to make sure with my intentions is always get the best out of every session. The next question I usually ask, depending on where they're at, like in this case, he said he's working on a project. And so it was like, okay, cool. Well, how's that going? Tell me what's that's looking like. And so he brought out dry erase board, had a list of songs, and he kind of went through and gave me the rundown of, okay, this is where I'm at with these, and this is the story behind them. And then he had like a specific list, maybe like 5 or 6 songs. And he was like, these are the ones that I'm essentially trying to get to 80%. It was a status that he kind of gave. And I like this too. He was like, these are in between stage of getting to what I call the 80% complete, which means they're ready to get shipped off to get mixed, mastered, all that good stuff. And so as soon as I heard that, my light bulb goes off and was like, all right, that's where we need to be at. So I was like, what's keeping those unfinished songs from becoming ready songs? And so he goes down the list. And as he's going down the list, I'm listening to the story of each one, or the process, or where he's stuck at, or what's lacking in them. And then I'm also looking at what the title is to see like if anything in particular actually jumps out at me. And there's one in particular that just happened to be, I think it was some lyrics that he didn't feel too strongly about. Something super minor, something that with a few tweaks, I felt like we could have got completed fairly easily. On top of that, they had somebody else in the session who's happened to be a songwriter as well. And while I'm not necessarily a songwriter, not that I can't write a few lyrics or contribute a few lyrics, but I don't necessarily consider that to be one of my strong assets or something I'm trying to contribute. I was like, oh, this should be even better. So I was like, okay, well, hey, I like this song title right here. And since lyrics is where you're lacking at, or you're not feeling the strongest about, let's pinpoint, let's get to that point, and let's figure out what's going on so that we can get that 60% to an 80%, which is one step closer to completion. So what he ended up doing is bringing the track up, listen to it, and as usual, because he's super creative, super, multi-instrumentalist, he's focusing on chord progressions and adding different layers and elements, thinking that was what was going to take him to the next level. What we ended up figuring out or finding out was you didn't need more sounds and more elements. We needed to progress the story along with the song. And so we ended up saying was like, hey, I think this is a good foundation to build off of. Let's focus on some lyrics, which he just so happened to provide lyrics. So I was like, great, even better. Now he hadn't recorded the lyrics, all the lyrics just yet. I think it was just only the chorus, and then it was the first verse. So then we ran that a couple of times. And so as he's playing it, he continues to, share and dive more into what in particular was wrong with it. Like what wasn't working for him, what was preventing it from being completed. And so he kind of mentioned that, well, in this verse, I was kind of freestyling. I was riffing off of what I had in the chorus and just kind of filling in the blanks. And so I wasn't too strong about that. So what I ended up doing is trying to focus on what the story in particular was, like what was the overall arching theme or element of the project itself, where the song fit into that storyline, and then diving in and dissecting, is every line in this verse cohesive and telling the same story to where it generates and comes across the right way. And what we discovered was it wasn't. So what ends up going on is I have him move out the beat, move the all the instruments out, and just leave the vocals, so I can just hear the actual story, so I can pinpoint what it is. And it just so happens he had the lyrics typed up as well, so that was even better. And when I'd say just because of like this process alone, like because it was so intentional, literally after this, the session ended up finishing because it happened just that quick. So he happened to like leave out the room, go do something, and was like, let me see the lyrics. And so I'm going through, I'm looking at the chorus, looking at the verse, and I'm noticing they don't coincide, they don't work well together. Because what he's saying maybe halfway through the verse doesn't even match up with the first part of the verse, nor does it match up with the overarching theme of the song altogether. But what he did have is some other verses and things and lyrics he was playing around with. So I ended up scrolling up in there, and he has a second verse, and the second verse fit perfect. And so what I ended up telling him was like, hey, why don't we take this second verse, make it your first verse, and then we can just rewrite another verse that fits a lot better, right? And so he kind of dives into it, and this is another theory for another day, but he tells me he wants to keep the song short because he feels like he doesn't like when songs drag out, although he loves to add different elements, but dragging the song on too long could tire the story out and essentially lose your audience because you're just saying the same thing over and over again, and it's not building or leading up to anything. So he's like, I kind of want to keep this one short. So do I even have to have a second verse? And I was like, well, actually, no, you don't. If you've already said what all you have to say, just keep it right here and just boom, move on to the next song. And literally, we got that out the way, and that was the end of the session. Now he's working on actually recording those vocals and getting it to that 80%. Well, essentially, once he records those vocals and gets them where he wants them, the song is at that 80% where he wants it to be at, so he can ship it out, get it mixed, and then it's on to the next one. And that's a little bit of what the process looks like. What I do is I audit where we're at. In this case, the audit came back with we need less creation, more direction. After that, I diagnose. In this case, we found out the story wasn't cohesive. We broke down literally to the line where it actually fell off at, where we needed to patch up. And we were actually willing to go in there and work on some more lyrics. But again, because he had created so much, like I said, super talented. He had plenty to choose from. He just needed somebody who had a vision from the outside looking in, who could see the bigger picture and then pinpoint, hey, you don't need to do more. You've already got it. You just need to arrange it and put it right here, and you're good to go. And then after that, the results were given. And ultimately, this is where it really comes into play at. And this will kind of let you know if this is the artist that you really want to be with and the environment you need to be in. Is the person receptive and willing to, I won't even necessarily say concur, but at least willing to consider whatever the results are, what that means for them, and at least fit it into their process to get the results. Because genuinely, he could have said, well, that's not where I am anymore. Yes, those lyrics tell the story better, but I actually want to tell the story in a different way. I want to end it differently. But at least we could agree, like, well, let's create something that's more cohesive. Can you get the person to that point? Because I've seen a lot of people, they're very headstrong and they're so adamant about what their vision is, even if it doesn't make sense. In their mind, it makes sense. Everybody in the room could tell them, hey, this ain't it. We need to go a different direction. But if they're sold on it, and sometimes you do need to have that confidence in yourself, and sometimes it does take a team and it takes a team effort to get, to the next level. But ultimately, if the results aren't fitting, if it isn't gelling, then you as the creative director, visionary, A&R, whatever you want to call it, the role you're setting in right there, you have to make the decision. What does that mean for you now? Because ultimately, if you're not able to build off of that, it's going to choose a direction, the trajectory of the remainder of not only that song or that track, but the rest of the project as well. And if it's not cohesive and gelling, and then of course, essentially, if the relationship isn't cohesive and gelling, you have to make the decision: is this something you want to continue to be a part of, or kind of let it sit, see if the person comes back in a couple of days and say, hey, you know what? I listened to it. I thought about what you said. I see it now. Or they may just stick to that direction. And essentially, you have to live with that if you continue to stay on with that. And that's why not only is it important for you to pick artists who have a strong identity and a strong vision and know that direction they're already going in, but then you yourself have to make those same decisions about yourself, even before you get into those rooms, even before leaving your own house, your own area, stuff like that. Because if it's not already made up in your mind, the choice is going to come. And where you stand on your own identity and how strong you believe in that will determine whether you make that decision or you allow the decision to get made for you. So with that, we move on to the next case. Case number 2, we'll call What's Your Foundation? I also like to say that one of the things that I really liked about both of these sessions were that the artists were super strong, not only on their creative abilities, but also their intent and their vision of what they wanted to build out. I look for artists that are strong and actually have a desire, a drive, even not just a desire, because you can hope and wish all day long, but is that generating something that's going to bring about results or action out of it. I look for artists who that I don't want to have somebody who I have to push to create something or push to release something, like, because if that's the case, you're almost playing babysitter then. Now you have to do twice the work. You have to find out what the vision is. You have to provide the direction, encouragement. At that point, it's almost like you might as well be Thanos and put the Infinity Gauntlet on and say, fine, I'll do it myself. And if that's the case, what do you need the artist there for? Which in that case, like I said, that's why knowing your own intentions, your own identity is super key to being successful. Because if you're hitching your wagon to somebody else and they're not going anywhere, well, guess what? Neither are you. So you have to have that drive to know it's time to part ways or align yourself with something else or somebody else. to get to the ultimate goal. But in the case, like I said, none of these artists have that issue, thank God. So we won't even harp on that anymore. In this particular case, what I did find was lacking was foundation. And so what ends up happening is this particular artist is working on a religious project, which is all fine and dandy, cool, right? And they already have a producer, so I'm not even looking to provide beats because I do beats as well. I'm not even facilitating. So literally everything was already laid out. What it should have been, and it actually ends up being a good session, minus this one little small part that if that was the most rocky part of it, this artist has nothing to worry about. But when they say, hey, I'm working on this religious project, I say, okay, cool, bet. And as I said, always look, what's the story? And then I continue to just chip away the questions after that. So when they tell me, well, hey, this is the theme behind it, this is the element, this is what I'm looking to convey across with my message at the end of this project, I say, okay, cool, solid. Well, since it's religious, have you been studying any religious doctrines pertaining to this particular belief that you're looking to come across? Because essentially, how can you convey across something that you're not actually pouring into yourself or pulling from or drawing from for your references, your inferences, your 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 uh your inspiration even. And I could tell this was potentially a sore spot because I had to ask the question multiple times, in which normally I don't even like to do that. Reason being, I don't like being questioned. And I think a lot of us can attest and agree with that. They don't like the questions because it makes you uncomfortable. It makes you have to face the cold, hard truth and the facts about it. And then not only admit the truth to yourself, but then if you're truly adamant and set on doing this, you have to figure out why. Why am I not facing this? So ultimately, they end up saying, well, no, they hadn't read any religious scriptures or anything pertaining to their own subject matter, which then led me to another question, which I kind of already posed. Well, if you're not reading or researching this, then what's serving as your source and acting as the driving force behind your creativity? When you get stuck on a lyric, you get stuck on a part, or you're looking for the direction outside of your own creative mental intentions, where are you drawing your inferences from? And so with this, I normally try to ask 3 or 4 questions depending on, but because that was the first one out the gate, and like I said, with the case name, the foundation, I feel like that was a good point to stop right there. With this particular artist, they're very strong about their vision, about their craft, about how they deliver and things like that. So trying to figure those things out for them wasn't even a matter. And because they were strong, I wanted to make sure, and this was our first time actually working fully together. So whenever I'm coming into a new surrounding, a new environment, I always like to sit back and just observe and absorb even. Let them know that I'm there to support, but I'm not here to overpower or overtake, especially when you have artists that have strong personalities. So what I did do because of this, because I could have came in and said, well, how are you going to work on this project and you're not even doing the research or you're not doing whatever. Definitely could have offended, could have came up the wrong way. So what I did suggest was, hey, if you're going to do this and it's really going to come across the way you want it to, you're going to have to be intentional about it. And because I'm here to support, what I'll do is I'll do some research for you and I'll shoot you a couple of things over whatever I get pertaining to this theme or this subject, to which they were actually receptive, responsive to, and they said, hey, I would greatly appreciate that. And this is something I do anyways. If you follow my content, I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ. And the religious album is a Christian album. It's a gospel album. So it's something I do in my personal life anyway. So it wasn't far-fetched, nor was it something that came across from left field, because I already make it a point that whenever I'm doing my social media posts, I always try to incorporate God in everything I do, which then brings to another point. You want to be able to develop that trust with who you're working with. Because I already post scriptures, I talk about God in almost everything that I create or that I do, he could trust that what I was saying wasn't coming from a place of judgment or condemnation or anything like that. It was genuine because it's something I already practice. And so I also know that when it comes to people's religion, people can get super sensitive. Like everybody loves to quote Tupac, only God can judge me. So I wanted to be cautious that I wasn't coming across that way. So what I ended up doing, I went back, uh, sat in prayer time, by myself, and then I approached my own Bible study as if this were my project. And if I were going to do this project, what were the things that I would want as a foundation? Funny enough, the subject matter had to do with foundation. So a lot of the Bible scriptures that I gave were related about foundations and what comes out of foundations, like the fruit. And then from fruit, it was even, fruits of the spirit, just no brainers, very super surface level, but still acted more as an introduction. Because I know a lot of times people say trying to read the Bible can be intimidating or be overwhelming. So I didn't want to do the work for them. I just wanted to crack the door open and it get them going. So that way, when they read it, it would prompt them to go in and do even more. But at least you already have a starting point, and you don't necessarily have to figure out what the trajectory is because it's already been decided based off of what it is that you wanted. And I honestly didn't know how it was going to come out. But the results end up being he was receptive, and he even gave some feedback and said, "Hey, I like what you sent right here. I like this. This spoke to me and spoke to what it is I want to bring about in my project. And because you sent this, I'm going to go now and do my own research, my own reading." And what that also did for them is gave them a starting point, something they don't have to go back, go across. Now, granted, they could come across the same scripture later on and like a totally different meaning for them, but that's already checked off their list. If they didn't know where to start at, whether it was Malachi or was it Matthew, but guess what? They have a point now because I gave them a point of reference for their own theme. And if anything else like that, especially if we have tools like Google or even AI, all they have to do now is go in and say, "Hey, give me scriptures, give me things that are derivative of this particular scripture right here." And that's one of the other things that I feel that is important, empowering others to help themselves, not necessarily doing the work for them, but allowing them to lead themselves to their own answers and to their own understanding. Now, a point I want to make as I'm kind of rounding out the second case. Everything that I discussed, every case that I just gave you all, notice that none of this had to do about plugins or drum kits. It was all about decisions. And the reason why I'm stating it and I'm stating it the way it is because once direction is locked in, everything else speeds up. Notice in the first case, the guy had sounds upon sounds, even lyrics that they didn't even realize that they had. But once we were able to identify it ain't the sounds, move on to that. Let's get to the lyrics. Oh, you've got lyrics. Let me see your lyrics. We got to the lyrics. This doesn't match, but hey, you got more lyrics. Here's a lyric right here. Put that in. Literally, they left out the room. We pinpointed where the lyrics were off at, found the lyrics or found verse that fit in there. Boom, that was the end of the session right there. On to the next. Again, locking in with direction is intentional and key to getting the most out of your work and out of your time effectively, honestly. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead. We're gonna wrap this thing on up. Uh, Even though this is kind of different from what the actual setting is going to be, I would like to kind of revisit this type of format. But moving forward, what we're looking at doing is, especially this is going to be every Friday, first and foremost, at 9 o'clock, unless otherwise stated. And what we're going to do is in these sessions, we're going to run it with one artist, one song, applying live pressure with live direction. What that means is when I have somebody come in, they're going to present their song wherever they're at, whether it's unfinished, complete, whatever. And then we're going to ask those questions even before they even play it. Hey, what's your story? Where are you going with this? So that way, as we're listening, we can draw in and say, hey, is this cohesive? Am I following along? Did we get off the path anywhere? Is anything not cohesive or doesn't align with the vision or with the mission of the song or the intent of the piece of work or that we're examining? And then we're going to give live directions to get them where they need to get to so that it is cohesive. Now, for those who are a little bit more intentional, or you know what, maybe you just say, I'm not ready to present mine to the world or to an open formatted area just yet. I also offer private one-on-one sessions. So if you're looking for that, you want to see what that looks like, just personally one-on-one for yourself, just DM me SOS and I got you. I'll hook you up with the link. We can get from there. Now, oh, see, we got a comment coming in. Let's see. Got some Q&As. All right, we're actually going to wrap up Q&As right after this, so that's cool. For artists who, like I said, do, want to do private sessions or anything like that, same thing, DM me, and I'm more than happy to provide you the link in the DM. Also, for those who want to chat, there's a link in the bio on IG. If you go to GodSouL underscore COO, that's GodSouL underscore cool COO. The link is in the bio. If you want to have private chats, hit me up. More than happy to help. All right. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get to the Q&A. You can either come on the mic or you can just type them into the chat and we'll get this thing rolling. All right. So the first question is, what's the one question you ask an artist first before you even listen to their music, and why? That is a good question. I actually think I kind of covered it earlier on. I always ask, what's the story? I always look to see what's the vision, what's the storyline? Have you even decided it yet? And do you have an ending in mind? I look at music as being just like creative writing. For those who had language arts, especially in grade school, remember in creative writing classes, the teacher always had you break it down to like 4 or 5 things. It was an introduction. You had to figure out, the plot was protagonist, antagonist. And then after that, you had rising action. Uh, you had a climax, then you had your falling action, and then you had your resolution. Does your music have that? When I think about classic albums, most notably, obviously, we have a Kendrick Lamar. I mean, he's pretty much that guy, not only because of his skill level, his content, but it's his delivery. He has that. He gives that to you. He's so creative enough, he might give it to you in reverse, but essentially that's what I look for in albums. Does it have a story? Did it start off right here? Do you have a build up? Do you give me a crescendo? And then do we have some type of resolution, some type of clause that ties it all together? For those of us who were brought up in the church, I look at it the same way. You go to church, you're going to come in, you have the introduction, you have your praise and worship, you have your rise in action, you're going to have your announcements and your introduction, first time visitors and stuff like that. Your crescendo, your climax is going to be when pastor comes up there, he starts giving that word, smacking the pulpit, doing all the other crazy stuff. And then we know our fall in action is usually going to do an altar call. And then our resolution is we do the benediction, if you're old school, or your closeout prayer, and then you're going to out of that piece. Does your work, does your art, does your album, your body of work, does it do that? And then even getting a little bit ahead of myself, we start talking about catalogs in the next couple of sessions. Does your catalog build on that? Because it's one thing to have one single body of work that tells a story, but then when you do another one, does it build off where you left off? Do we see growth? Do we see progression? Are you telling the same story over and over again? And if you are, Pusha T just talks about drugs all the time, but he's made a living off of it because he's found a way to still build on it, telling the same story, but from a different angle and a different sound, and people are still interested in it. But are you building on it to where your catalog speaks for itself, but it speaks cohesively? Is it still one voice? Like doggone drumline, is it one band, one sound? But yeah, that's what I look for. All right, let's see. Next question. When someone thinks their problem is technical, but it's identity, how do you cut through that? Wow. So this is where I definitely lean heavy on my faith. It is not me, but he who lives in me. Because I know I would be super foul and probably, rub somebody the wrong way. I think it's honestly, it's not only asking questions, it's what questions you ask and how. To where then you have to know how to talk to the person and then get on that personal level to ask them. And I think this is one great thing. A lot of the people I've been connecting with lately, this is how we start off a lot of our sessions. We ask, how are you doing? Not just creatively, but mentally, personally. How are you? Where are you at? What's going on? Because essentially, wherever you're at personally is going to fuel what you create and how you create, you know? So I would probably figure out a way to ask, hey, so specifically, what's going on in this area that you're talking about in your life? Is it this? Is it that? And then based off of how they answer, I will then continue to dig deep. And then 9 times out of 10, after asking about 2 or 3 questions, they're going to get word vomit. They're going to give me that answer that I'm looking for. And once I hear that, my next plan, my next mission is to then get them to convert those words into their story, write about that, and then convert that into lyrics that would essentially not only sharpen where they are creatively, but then gets them to restructure their own identity and how they see themselves so that we can build off of that instead of constantly having to rework and rewrite not only the content, but their image as well. Like I remember there was a time where I was working with a particular artist, and literally every session had to start off with a Ayan Van Zant Fix My Life session that lasted 30 minutes. And that's before we even got to the music. But what I found was doing that allowed them to open themselves up, and it made it for better work because they're like, wow, I got all this out now. I feel great. Like, good. Now put all that into your music. And the times that they didn't do it, their writing would be flat, the singing would be just off. And I'd have to pause the session and be like, all right, man, what's going on? What do you mean? Nah, you can miss me with all of that. Tell me what's going on. Get it out your system now because it's affecting and hindering your performance and your abilities right now. And we're not going to get to where we need to get to unless you get it out your system. So just get it out. This is what it takes. And 9 times out of 10, it was effective. Next question. Let's see what we got. What's a belief you've had to confront in yourself to be effective at what you do? Wow, there's a lot. I'll give you one. And funny enough, it's about confidence and identity, that what I have to offer matters, even if it comes in the form of something intangible. And this was something I was actually sharing with a group of guys I'm starting a collective with, where I'm so used to defaulting to being a beat maker that when I enter a room and they're not looking for beats, they're not looking for the samples, anything like that. But what I have to offer is so small that maybe it only takes me, like I said, 5 minutes. That then I'm like, well, what am I here for? Or did I really even contribute anything? What if the person doesn't take it to take heed to it and actually utilize it or take my advice? To the point I have to daily, multiple times a day, tell myself uh, what I have to say matters, not because it's me, because God's given me that. And He wants me to use that voice. And that even if the person doesn't take heed to it, it doesn't say anything about me or make what I did or said any less important. That's on them. And I just need to stand firm and believe not only in uh, the Holy Spirit that empowers me, but then also what He's telling me to say. It makes you think about a lot of times in the Bible, specifically look at like Jeremiah. They call him the weeping prophet. But you figure out he has a huge chunk of the Old Testament. He prophesied the whole thing, the whole destruction that was going to come to the children of Israel, and nobody listened to him. Did that make him any less powerful? Did that make him any less important? No, because what he said came to pass, even if it didn't lead to the people to doing anything differently, even if it was only like a handful of people. And so looking at it from a place of obedience for my success rate or my how I rate my success versus the fruit that I see come across where I planted it. And even that's getting back into foundation. I'll spare y'all that today. But looking to the source and not the soil always for my confirmation of the fruit has really helped me get to a point of where I can confront those voices, those negative voices in my head that tell me it doesn't matter or it's not valid or not important. Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. So another one just came in. If you had to reduce your message to one sentence that every artist must understand, what would it be? That's a great question. I would say, funny enough, it's a line that I actually may adopt as my closing line. And this is something I will speak to every creative, every artist, that talent isn't rare, but clarity is. And as I said earlier, once you have the direction, everything else follows. So be intentional with your direction, be intentional with your clarity. For sure. Any more questions before we close it out today? Give you a few more seconds. And if I don't get to your question today, hey, I promise it's cool. Feel free to DM me or email. This is GodSouL at gmail.com. All right. I'm going to take this last question and then I'm going to close it out. When someone tells you they don't want to chase trends, yet their music sounds like everyone else's, how do you respond? Um, it honestly depends on in what way their music sounds like everyone else's. Is it their beat selection, to which that could be like, all right, well, let's push you to do something a little bit outside of your comfort zone. And then I'll usually ask some questions about what their influences are. If I'm not familiar with those influences, I'll do some deep diving, do some research, and find something that's unique that stands out in their body of work. So that's something they can easily identify with. And I'll say, well, hey, your artist is such and such. They had a song titled blah, 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 blah that didn't sound like everything else. How do you feel about that song? Where does that rank on your level of, likeness or dislikes and stuff like that? And then I'll start chasing after usually samples because I'm a sample-based producer, but not just necessarily for actually sampling for the song or for the beat, but as a reference. Like, can you hear yourself on something like this based off of what we just discussed? If we're talking cadence, uh, this is where creatively I would challenge them to, again, get into that creative writing bag and say, hey, there's different styles that you can write in. We can say this, but let's try to elongate. Let's shorten this up. Let's use different literary devices that can still help convey the message, but convey it either on a more complex, or on a more simplistic level to at least break it up, to break up the monotony, to break up the redundancy. And then we can always come right back to whatever that pattern is that you are used to, but at least you gave them something different to break it up. Let's see. And then if it's themes or what they're talking about, then this is where it goes back to the identity. Why do you identify with this particular theme so much? And is that all that's there to you as an individual and as a creative? What's a part of your story that goes unnoticed, underdeveloped, or even that you have hidden away that people don't know about? What's the thing? I think there's a game that people will say like two truths and a lie, or they'll say, uh, give me something that people would know about you, and then give me something that they wouldn't know about you. Give me that what we wouldn't know about you, and then let's try to write or create around that. And I think that's a way to not only stand out, but then that's also adds another layer of depth to you that you could always branch off and expand on in the world you're creating for your listeners. Great question, by the way. Thank you for posing that. And with that, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, this has been Stories Over Sound. Again, if you want to connect with me, either DM SOS on my IG. My IG handle is GodSouL, GODSOUL_COO. Or you can email me at thisisgodsoul@gmail.com. Again, whatever, or you just hit SOS, I'll automatically know, send you that link. Or if you actually want to just go to the link yourself, if you go to that same IG handle, that link is in the bio. With that being said, again, remember, talent isn't rare, but clarity is. Thanks for being in the room with your boy. This has been Stories Over Sound. I'm your man, God. So, peace.